Kaizen, karate in Okinawa, and being a CPTO. Let's hear Rico's unique experiences and his commitment to innovation and improvement. Welcome to Breaking Down Barriers. Rico, why the obsession with Japanese culture, and what has it taught you?
So hey Mark, first of all, thank you for having me. Japanese culture, it's a great place to start. It's close to my heart. And we've got loads of fantastic things to talk about. So I first went to Japan I just turned 18. It was kind of like 2001, 2002, something like that. And I remember landing in Tokyo, Narita Airport. I remember getting on the train. And I was looking out the window of the train, firstly going, "Oh my God, what am I doing here? I'm on the other side of the world on my own, here to learn karate at the time." And I was looking out the window, and there was this guy, and he was vacuuming the platform of the station. And I just thought, okay. And the train goes in, it goes into central Tokyo, and we get off the train and we go through the barriers. And there's this other guy, and he hands me a ticket, and I was like, well, this is odd as well. What's going on here? Like normally you put the ticket in and you kind of leave the station. And somebody leaned over and explained to me in pretty decent English, actually. It's the train was 3 minutes late, and this ticket is to show your boss and explain to him why you're 3 minutes late for work.
That's crazy.
And I was like, okay. And so I had an exposure to a world where, all of the problems are kind of the same, but the solutions are ever so slightly different. And I think for me, it was just a very kind of foundational forming experience where I saw a different culture very much in action. And it sort of taught me that, there are lots of problems. Lots of those problems have similarities, but there are lots of different ways in which you can solve for them. And actually, some of your kind of base assumptions may be slightly different in different contexts. So it was a early formative experience for me, I suppose.
I love that. You're also a black belt in karate.
Mm.
How do you apply, because there's a mindset, isn't there? You talked earlier about the dojo. How do you apply the mindset in your everyday life and also in the workplace?
Done karate for a long time before I went to Japan. I think started around 89, something like that. So it's a very, very long time now. And I suppose probably so long that it's less kind of consciously applying it and more a part of who I am and how I approach things. And you mentioned Kaizen right at the top there. Very famous, made famous, I think, by Toyota, talked about a lot in the product communities. But for anyone that's not familiar, it's fundamentally that notion of iterative, small incremental improvements, iterative improvements. And I think I first learned that through my karate experiences. And, it could be anything. It could be playing golf. It could be, whatever your thing might be. That idea that actually perhaps, slightly contrary to some of the product thinking, it's not so much about the goal. It's more about, the journey to that goal, mm-hmm. What you're learning as you go, all the little kind of micro interactions, all the little things you do and you tweak and you go, well, that worked really well. That didn't work so well. And for me, I learned that through karate and through exercise and through, developing myself physically and mentally and all of those kinds of things. I think it then kind of bled through into the work culture and the work life. And you go, well, actually, all of the principles are, broadly the same. Yes, we're doing it in an office now, and yes, we're talking about digital product development or whatever it might be, but that idea that you go, well, what's the simplest thing I can start with? If I'm trying to learn to kick or I'm trying to learn to punch, you break it down and you go, well, I'm not going to try and do it all in one go. I'm not going to apply this in a free fighting scenario right off the bat, possibly not going to do that for years. How am I going to think about, well, what are the, again, sort of foundational exercises that are going to develop the muscle memory that are going to get me in a place where I can start to do some of that stuff. And you build on it. And then you'll meet maybe another teacher and they'll go and they'll explain some concepts to you and you'll be like, well, wow, I actually didn't know what I was, I've been doing this for 3-4 years. I didn't know what I was doing at all. And they'll just kind of completely open your mind to some new concepts. And then a few years later, you'll meet someone else. And like you said, most recently went to Okinawa tail end of last year, met 3-4 different senseis from different karate styles. And I was like, wow, even at 34, 35 years in, totally opening my mind to the different ways in which you can approach the most simple fundamental components of a particular thing. And I think that is absolutely applicable in the work context. Just because, I built an app or helped, was part of a team that helped build an app for, Sky in, 2010 or whatever it was, doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to be able to apply exactly the same learnings to building an app in 2024. Even if it's for another, news, mainstream media type organization, there might be some things that I learned that I can apply, but actually the context, the industry, the company, the team, all of those things around it are different. So I think it's experiences, it's incremental, it's never making too many assumptions, those sorts of things coming together.
Yeah, I get that. It's the journey, not the destination. Also made me think of Sir Dave Brailsford and the 1% marginal aggregate gains and pedals over podiums.
Yeah, it's another really
it's really
common
good
example.
Yeah.
There's a great quote, not from Japan, from China or Hong Kong, Bruce Lee's famous absorb what is useful, discard what isn't useful, and add what is uniquely your own. And that's the T-shirt quote, right?
Yeah.
But people often cut off the bit at the beginning where he started by saying, research your own experiences. And he was really famous for going out and going, well, he did Kung Fu at the time. And he goes, well, I'm going to learn karate, and I'm going to learn Aikido, and I'm going to learn kickboxing, and I'm going to learn Western box, and I'm going to go and do all these other things because they're going to build into, this new thing that I'm developing, because I'm in, a new environment and I'm a different person to the person that's standing next to me. And I think, again, same applies in the work context.
Okay. You write some really fantastic articles, and you wrote a blog about how to shoot for the stars. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes. So that was fun for me personally. I really enjoyed that. So it actually started off with another blog post. So I wrote a blog post about kind of product teams and kind of equilibrium of capabilities. So it was all about thinking about the balance of skills, not having too many junior or too many over-experienced people, and thinking about it as an ecosystem, if you will. So I wrote that and I put it out there. And a couple of days after I put it out there, it was liked on LinkedIn by Dan Goldin, who was the previous head of NASA. I think he was the longest serving chief of NASA. And I was
yes, that's right.
And I was like, whoa, the chief of NASA just liked a thing that I wrote. And so, you get the ego and the adrenaline, you're like, that's so exciting. I got really excited about it. But then I stopped myself and it reminded me of this other story from way back, 16 years old at school, typical 16-year-old. And you get to that point in that kind of tail end of secondary school in the UK. And it all becomes a little bit about careers and where you're going to go with your life and what you're going to do. And I remember our career counselor, our career coach at school, talking about this week of work experience. And everyone starts applying to these different jobs, people go into the local supermarket, whatever. And I'm like, I want to work for NASA. And the career coach was like Rico, let's be realistic. There's these companies locally, there's these things, we want you to have, applied, functional, go out and do a thing. This is about just getting your first kind of experience of doing some work. And I was like, no, I want to go and work for NASA. So I wrote this letter to NASA, which she was very unhappy about at the time. She really wanted me to kind of grab myself. So I wrote this letter and I sent it off, and she's like, you gonna write some other letters? And I'm like, no. That's what I do. That's what I'm going to do. So I wrote that letter, and it went off. And about 10 days, 2 weeks later, I got a letter back, and I just got this lovely note from someone at NASA in the administration team saying, "Thank you so much for applying. We really appreciate the interest." And they sent me a whole bunch of posters and all of this kind of stuff. And they're like, we don't accept applicants from outside the US, but here are some things you can think about in the UK. And I took it back to my career coach, and she was like, "Great. But you don't have a job to go to in 2 weeks' time." But I wasn't worried about that at all. I was like, I sent one letter to NASA,
Yeah.
and I got a response. And I was just, that again for me was a really formative moment where I looked at something and I said, well, I'm going to do a thing, and I did a thing, and I got a response to a thing that everybody around me at the time said would not be possible and was totally unrealistic. And pretty much ever since that point, if I need something or I want to do something, I don't do it in an abrasive way, but I just ask in a very, very human way. So that was so I then wrote a follow-up blog post about that experience, and that sort of went slightly viral and people got kind of very excited about it. It was just, I think, a nice example of, if you want an experience, you want a piece of advice, you just reach out and you ask people and you'll probably get a response more often than not. But that was a fun one for me. That just kind of, there's lots of nostalgia and that sort of thing.
It also maybe encourages that mindset of experimentation and innovation and trying things and reaching for the stars, because what's the worst thing that can happen?
Absolutely. So many similar stories. I remember when I had I can't remember what the problem was. It was a product conundrum I was thinking over in a kind of head of product capacity or something like that. And I was thinking about this problem. I was like, I don't quite know where to turn. I don't quite know what to do. And so I thought, well, I'll email Marty Kagan. He's set up Silicon Valley Product Group. If there's a godfather of product, it's Marty. So I'll just email him. And I think within 2 hours, he emailed me back with this really comprehensive response. And I just thought, yeah, again, that's just kind of validated. If you want to do something, just do it. Because the worst that can happen is he didn't respond, or they didn't respond, or what. It's not really a downside to just reaching out and doing a thing.
And you apply the same mentality of reaching out for support with your perspective and view on mentors and coaches. And you have this mentality of treating yourself like a CEO and gathering those around you. Yeah. Could you share more on that?
Yeah. And I think that is so, I would say that's one of the keys to some of my success is not really me. It's about the group of people that you put around yourself, and not just in the kind of pure day-to-day capacity, but as you say, in kind of a mentor capacity. And I hear so many people say, oh, I would love a mentor, or I've been thinking about having a mentor, and don't necessarily sort of take that step and actually do something. Or maybe they'll do something small as a part of an internal scheme within an organization. It's very kind of predetermined. They kind of grab two people and they force them together.
For 6
but
weeks.
It's got to be, yeah, exactly. But it's got to be a little bit more organic, and it's got to be a little bit more natural, and you've got to find a fit. So to an extent, you've got to try loads of mentors in order to find the people that are going to be symbiotic with you. But also, different people are going to have different perspectives, and they're going to have different specialisms, and they're going to have different experiences and guidance that they can apply. So nobody ever said have one mentor. Actually, I've got a mentor that really helps me with product stuff. I've got a mentor that really helps me with tech stuff. I've got a mentor that really helps me with the leadership stuff. I've got a mentor that is probably less of a mentor, more of an emotional coach who just helps me when I need to decompress because I've had a tough day, or I'm chewing over something in the office that is difficult to get beyond. And so you go to the right people at the right time for the right type of guidance, I think. But you can also bring those people together. I've had instances where, I remember, when I first got my role at Which in the UK, the Consumers Association company, I was going in for the final round interview. Classic kind of task, all about strategy, all of those sorts of things. And I was sort of sitting there going, well, I know what I want to do. And I wrote my slides out, and I was like, but I'm just one person. And in practice, when I'm in the role, I'm not going to be one person. I'm going to have a whole team of people. And so how do I put the best version of me forward in this context? And I was like, well, I'll go to my mentors. And so you get a little brain trust together, and you go, well, here's 3-4 people. I'm going to pitch my presentation to you. What do you think of this? And you get the notes, and you get the feedback, and you get different perspectives. And, some of them you're going to agree with, and some of them you're not going to agree with. And that's where you take what's useful, you discard what isn't, and you add what's uniquely your own. And, obviously worked in the Which sense, been there for 5 and a bit years now. But I think mentors are so important. And so often it doesn't have to be a big commitment. Some of my mentors I see, once a year, or, once every 6 months for an hour or something. It doesn't have to be a big structured, once a week we're going to do this thing.
I think people put these barriers up, don't they? It's such an important decision. Which coach am I going to commit to?
Don't overthink it.
I've done it.
Just
I've
talk
done
to
it.
people,
Okay.
have
Okay.
breakfasts, have lunches.
You said something a moment ago. And with your approval, I'm going to steal the brain trust.
The brain trust. Yeah. I can't remember where that
The
came
brain
from. I
trust.
feel like that came from Scrubs or something like that.
I like that. Let's talk about Which.
Mm.
The first time you invited me to discuss Which, you explained a bunch of eclectic scientists in labs breaking things. You painted this picture of this company with purpose and mission, quite complex, so on a digital transformation with journalists and traditional kind of people that you would think in that consumer business. What's the journey? 5 years. Where were you? Where did you get to? It's a long piece of work that you've done there, but can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, 5 years is feels both like a blink of an eye, but is also a decent chunk of time. And again, for context, Which is about a 70-year-old organisation, bit of a heritage brand here. It's about 650, 700 people. It is an eclectic mix of very different types of people. It's principally, or was certainly principally, a subscription business, and it's all there to help consumers of products and services make good decisions and get the best quality or best value for money of the things that are out there, the options that are out there for them. And it was very much born out of a print magazine, or a leaflet, I think, originally, print magazine. And when I joined, it started to it acknowledged digital. There was, it had a website, and it was beginning to think about those things. But it was still, I think, quite early stages in thinking strategically about what that really meant. And there were a lot of different initiatives and a lot of different goals. And I sort of break the 5 years that I was at Which into probably 3 chunks. I think the first sort of 12, 18 months was all about focus, kind of alignment and strategy. So it was all, introduction of OKRs, thinking about what is the vision, what is the strategy, how are we going to digitize the organization, both from a customer perspective, but also from an internal employee perspective.
So which came first?
I think they were hand in hand. You can't, I don't think you can really do one entirely without the other. And there was a lot of people change involved in that too. So introducing things like the squad operating model, product ways of thinking, and for an organization that has been around for a long time, that is a journalistic content-led organization, that's a lot of change to absorb. And timing-wise, COVID happened about 3-4 months into me joining, which was in so many respects a terrible thing, and lots of horrible things came about as a result of COVID. If there was a tiny silver lining in the work context for me, the fact that suddenly everybody was working from home was actually not unhelpful. We just, that week that COVID hit, introduced a digital CMS to put together the print publication. And there was a bit of, as you would probably expect, a little bit of kind of apprehension. What does this really mean? Up until this point, the magazine had been physically put together. The pages were printed out and handed from one desk to another. And between kind of product technology, the content team, the commercial teams, actually, Which didn't miss a single monthly magazine run as a result of COVID. We went from putting it together on paper to doing it digitally in a CMS and sending it off to the publishers, and we didn't, miss a beat. And so that was a, albeit very early stage for me. I can't claim credit for all of that by any sense of measure, but definitely a proud little moment for the team and the organisation. But lots of focus, lots of alignment, lots of what are we going to be.
In that stage one, you mentioned squads and product operating models. How did you go about choosing the model that you applied, and which model did you apply?
There are only so many models. I applied my flavour, I suppose, of and my interpretation. Again, having researched my own experiences and seen how a BBC. I spent time with three or so years with BBC iPlayer. Spent a bunch of time at Photobox, other kinds of organisations. I built up my own flavour of what I think a squad product operating model looks like. Not so wildly different from your Spotify models, etc. But with those little kind of tweaks that in a which context I think helped land it and make it a little bit smoother. And you do really have to be, I think, as a leader, very alive to the fact that if you're joining a new organization, you're the person that's coming in. Even if you've got a mandate, as I did, to influence change, you're still the outsider that's coming in. You're changing kind of their baby and the things that they've done. And so if you want to do that in a collaborative way that doesn't just immediately put everyone's backs up, it's got to be considered. It's got to be collaborative, as I say. And I think, one of the first things I did was I wrote down, all of the principles. It was a long doc. It's like 40 sides of A4. On
40?
It was about 40 sides of A4 on how I felt a good product operating model operates, what it looks like, from the roles and the teams and the dynamics to some of the ceremonies to how it operates very much cross-organizationally, where it interacts with OKRs, all of these kinds of things. And we did it in a Google Doc, and I said, okay, everyone's got a month, hack it apart, like put comments in it. What are your experiences? Like, what has worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? Where does this just cause too much kind of discomfort or tension? And it was a bit of a free-for-all. And I just blocked out a few bits and said, these are my non-negotiables. Like, these are the things from my experience that if we're going to be successful in a timely fashion that I want to hold on to. So an example of that would be the check-in format. So every 2 weeks, all of the teams, your classic kind of two-pizza team, however you want to describe it, product manager, designer, engineers, few cross-functional people, content people, etc. A team, every 2 weeks, having this open forum where it's an open invite. Anybody in the organization can come along and have a dialogue with that team about what they're doing, what they've done, what they've learned, where they're going next, but principally, like, what problems have they got? How can the people that are coming in help solve those problems? And it being very much a discursive rather than reporting forum. And so I put a lot of emphasis on this is what a good check-in looks like. And, that takes time, right? A bit like introducing OKRs. You don't go, this is what an OKR is, and then go, it's all smooth after that. It takes like several quarters at least to get those muscles working, to get people comfortable with writing an OKR or working in a particular model. And you have to iterate as you go, back to the Kaizen point. Like, you're not going to, I was never going to write that 40-page doc and go, everybody has to follow that to the letter. I probably would have left pretty soon afterwards with lots of disgruntled people. You've got to integrate it like a system or something like that. You've got to think about the impact on the humans in the organization and how that's going to work. So it was definitely a journey, and it's still ongoing now, 5 years later. Yes, there are some fundamentals that are in place. Yes, some of the teams are humming, and that's all good. But the external context changes, the economy changes, consumer behaviors change, AI, whatever it might be, the products and services that are out there. So how teams build for things will naturally have to evolve as well. So you can't write this kind of tomb, this gospel of an operating model and go, well, that's just going to work forever now. I fully expect as time goes on, well after I've left Which, it will continue to evolve and people will change things. And I would see that as a success, not a failure.
So you had phase one, the Bible, the non-negotiables, the changing of the mindset and the ways of working, and also, as you're describing, that switch to the digital CMS and not skipping a beat when it comes to print publishing, which is awesome. So what was phase two and then phase three?
So phase two, I think I would sort of almost describe as kind of classic digital transformation. So in this organization's context, that meant sort of systematically ripping out every bit of tech and replacing it for things that were fit for purpose. And doing that, mindful of, the people that we had, the resources, for want of a better word, the type of people, patterns and operating model that we wanted to have in the coming years. And so we worked our way through, we prioritized, we thought about, well, what's the customer experience we want? How does that align to some of the strategic goals that we've had? And we and some of that was exciting, innovative, new feature development type work. A lot of it was kind of quite grunt work. Quite, we had, I forget the exact number now, but it was a horribly high figure. We had something like 30 separate content management systems for the digital website as it was when I first joined. And you can imagine, like, that's a nightmare. Like, editors having to log into multiple different instances to do things. They're copying and pasting content between them. The developers are tearing their hair out because they can't keep everything in sync, up to date. The global nav's a mess because you're trying to move between these different things. Like, it was painful for everybody. And, not uncommon, actually, for an organization that's been around for a while.
And change is hard for everyone.
Yeah, things get built up over time. And so that piece of work, we had a great team working on that. It was kind of painful and at times a bit laborious because they would pick the next CMS instance and they go, right, we're going to take these bits of content and this feature was really good here, and we're going to bring that back into a core, and then we're going to discard that and we're going to move on to the next one. And they spent the best part of, I think, 18 months going on 2 years as a team doing that one piece of work. But it meant that at the end, everything was in one target state. Now, it wasn't perfect.
Mm-hmm.
The content probably could have been structured in a slightly better way. Certainly didn't have all of the features that the editorial staff wanted. Certainly didn't have all of the features that our customers wanted when they interacted with the experience. But it meant that we had quite a solid starting point with which then to do all of the things that we wanted to going forward. And it's a bitter pill to swallow, right, going through something like that.
I'm hearing the messy middle.
Yeah.
I'm also hearing a moment where the journey versus the destination isn't quite so enjoyable because it's change and it's painful.
Yeah.
Was this also the moment that the conversation around CPO or CTO or CPTO started to come into play? Because you didn't join as a CPTO.
Yeah, I joined as a pure chief product officer.
Yeah.
About 12, 18 months in, somewhere in the middle of that, took on that wider remit of technology, which I was, kind of apprehensive about at the time. Incredibly glad that I did it now. One of the best decisions.
What was the apprehension?
Well, a number of apprehensions. One, it's a broad remit. Like it changes the nature of the role, or at least I can appreciate now, it changes the nature of the role intrinsically. If you've got a model where you've got a CPO, a CTO, even a chief data officer, some things like where you're spreading some of those disciplines out, a chief design officer, you're spreading those disciplines out, you are the head of a discipline and you're responsible for the people and the practices, and you're perhaps responsible for, say in a product context, the vision of the product that you're creating, or in the technology context of the systems, the services, the integrations, the middleware, whatever it might be, infrastructure, and you're a little more closely coupled to them. Like that's a big part of your role. In a CPTO, it's almost a little more like a COO or something like that. The remit is that much broader. You couldn't possibly own the ins and outs of the product vision and be doing the technical architecture and leading the program management of particular initiatives and doing this, that, and the other, worrying about the cybersecurity. It's a much more kind of holistic, much more people-oriented role by nature. So the actual day-to-day in practice is quite different. Now, I think in a Which context, it works quite well, because the product offering that we put out there, yes, it's in large part a digital service, but it's not a technology company in the sense that, say, like a Google DeepMind is or something like that. There, you're almost certainly going to want a CTO, right? You're going to want someone that's going to be able to go deep on the engineering, on the technology, know the ins and outs of that, because that's where the innovation is. That's where like the heart of the product is. In an e-com business or, in an organization like Which, actually bringing some of those disciplines together, I think allows you to still have those discrete disciplines, but you've got a point where you can cut out some of the unnecessary conversation. And I think for me, that was one of the, particularly in the first kind of few months of doing that role, was the biggest benefit, because I found that in the CPO, CTO context, yes, we'd be having some really important conversations some days, but other days, actually, we would be debating or going round on things that maybe we were more philosophically aligned to or something, but probably weren't the biggest problems to solve for the organization. And I see this everywhere all the time, right? The more people you have around the table, the more discussion you're going to have, the more difference of opinion you're going to have. And sometimes that's good, but sometimes if you're not talking about the right thing, it's actually not a great use of time. And so I think for me, having the CPTO in this organization allowed us to move a little bit more quickly, because we could have the important conversations still. I had a great head of engineering, great head of product, etc. But we could take out some of the unnecessary conversations. We didn't need to over-debate Agile. We didn't need to over-debate whatever it might be. We could just go, this is the way we're doing it. We're going to move on.
And so you're into phase 3, and your role as this Chief Product Technology Officer is in situation. What was that final third then? What were the key metrics for success? What steps did you take to enable?
So that was, stage 3 was really then growth. And that shift, because I think they're very different mindsets. That middle phase, we ended up calling it simplify and modernize. The transformational kind of, and transformation's a terrible word, because as we know, there's no kind of, destination point. It keeps changing, except you're never transformed and then you kind of move on. You're like, you're always digital after that. But phase 3 was then about how you change again the mindset towards a growth mindset, and how you start to think about, well, in this context, this is not a business that we're looking to sell or something like that. This is a business that we want to have longevity. We want to do another 70 years of helping consumers make good decisions. And that will probably look a little different to what we do today. And that brings with it a whole bunch of other kind of uncomfortable questions and changes that an organization might need to make. And the people actually that you have doing CMS, very task-based perhaps CMS change, may well be different to the people that are going to do the very innovative new feature development, experimentation mindset for, well, what's next? Like if, for the last 70 years, the sticky mechanic to the proposition has been the magazine. It lands on the doorstep. It reminds you every month that you've got a subscription. It keeps you, you've got something tangible. You're like, well, I'm subscribing to a thing here. What's the sticky mechanic that goes for the next 70 years? Because it may not be the magazine. Actually, we see trends of younger audiences that do quite like lean back experiences, and that there's kind of a middle demographic who are like just not interested at all. But we see some of that coming back around. But in all likelihood, an organization like Which will need a sticky mechanic that is digital, a service element beyond what they do in terms of the product reviews today. And that's where, diversifying the revenue streams and diversifying the types of offering and being quite experimental plays a big part. And that's where Which is now.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a hell of a journey and a lot of success. So what are the traits that enabled the success? And also, I'd also love to ask, what are the learns? What are the fails?
Yeah. Traits. I mean, I always, probably a bit cliched, I always start with honesty. And I say that whether you're talking to the board or you're talking to, teams on the ground that are doing things, and doing it in a very genuine way. Now, it's, again, you've got to apply this probably in different ways in different organizational contexts. A PE board is going to be very different to a charitable board, etc. But for me, you're going to build a lot more credibility far quicker if you're just very honest about what you know, what you don't know, and what you're doing about to bridge any gaps that you might have. And I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, I remember really early doors at Which, just after I'd taken on that technology component, we had a big coming together of our executive leadership team, our commercial board for Which Limited, and the charitable trustees for the Consumers Association. And we were talking about the future. And I put this slide up, and it's had this big black box on it, and it had technology written above it. And I stood up and I was like, look, I actually kind of, having spent a little bit of time here, I've got no idea the breadth of technology that we have in operation in this organization. And actually, at the time, I was like, that's quite scary. Like we've got, and I'm, every day I discover a new system. Every day I discover a data store or a piece of infrastructure that we didn't know we had. And for many reasons, that's uncomfortable, not least security. And naturally, that was met with a little bit of kind of shock, a little bit of there was a mix of emotions in there. But most of all, I think it was appreciated that somebody was saying, look, we kind of don't know. And actually, we're now going to have to spend a little bit of time, cataloging and understanding what we've got in order to be able to form a plan of how we're going to respond to that and get ourselves into a healthy state. And I think you've then got something you can measure yourself against as well. So I think I'm going to couple that honesty piece then with that kind of clear, appropriately frequent communication and holding yourself to account to it. Going, this is what we knew. This is where we're at now. Actually, maybe we've learned a few more things since. This is the picture and this is how it's evolving. And I think if you're kind of radically honest about it and you hold yourself to account to it, you are going to build that credibility. You are going to build those relationships. And equally, then from a team perspective, I remember early days of doing kind of all hands or town halls with the teams. There'd been a lot of abstraction between the leadership and the teams on the ground. And they're like, what do you do? And so I remember
what is a CPTO?
What does that even mean? What are you doing all day? Like we see you sitting in the corner and you go to meetings. Like what does that mean in practice? I remember one all hands where actually I just talked through the agenda from the previous board meeting, and I said, well, these were the topics, and like these were some of the conversations that we, to the extent that was appropriate, and I was like, these are some of the things that we talked about. And for me, that was a really straightforward. I was in the meeting, I could talk. It was a very easy thing to do. But actually, for the teams, it was a degree of kind of honesty and insight and a kind of demystifying that in that particular organisation they'd not seen before, and it went a long way. So I think honesty, communication, which are incredibly cliched traits, but I would say those are really important.
They are cliched, but they are incredibly important, and they're not sort of ingrained naturally within every leader. You've been a leader for a long time. Have you seen it change? Is leadership harder than ever?
I think in some respects, yes. I hesitate because, of course, like there are absolutely periods of time, and there are countries around the world that are in far worse states than we are. So, like, there are definitely leaders that are more challenged, more stressed, more troubled in so many ways. But I think in our boundary of a modern kind of Western organizational leadership role, I think is pretty tough. I think you've got this coming together of, post-COVID, we're still, I think, reeling from that in so many ways. So much of the dialogue out there is still about ways of working, remote, hybrid, returns to the office, all of these things. It's still a big conversation, even if we don't, from any side really want it to be. You then throw in, the continual, consistent, really, rate of change of technology. And yes, like AI and things are a big topic now, but in so many respects, like the technology is always changing. Systems always have a life cycle. I think perhaps within there, though, senior leadership probably needs to be more technical than it's ever been before. And I think boards probably need to be more technical than they've ever been before. And I think that's an interesting change that we're seeing happen at the moment.
Do you think that boards have always been too commercial? And also, if I just tag on to that, not diverse enough?
I guess it depends on the organisation. So it is a little bit of it depends question. Of my experiences of what I've been exposed to, I would say that boards historically have been very commercial, very financial in that, we've got accountants, we've got lawyers, we've got those long-standing traditional disciplines that have, important skills relevant to running businesses. But we haven't necessarily, I think, historically seen strong technology leadership roles on boards to the same extent. Absolutely, there are companies out there that do, but I think in the broad sweep of organisations, perhaps less so. And I would say that probably can't continue in the way that it has. I think whether you're looking at it from a cybersecurity angle, whether you're looking at it from the advent of AI or employee technologies, these sorts of things, you can't really operate a business in 2024 at a board level without strong technical guidance and technical leadership. So I think that's something we're seeing change at the moment. I've certainly seen businesses take on more board members from a technical background. I think that's a good thing. I think that's healthy. I think we need to see a lot more of that. Not saying those other disciplines need to go away. You still absolutely do need people that are going to be able to understand the balance sheet. You absolutely do need people that are going to make sure that everything's above board legally. But I think the introduction of the technology roles, particularly important. I'm a little biased, I guess, on the product front. I would say you really want the product thinking in there as well. Commercial can bring some of that. Like I say, I'm a little biased. I would always like that true customer centric, experimentation mindset, risk informed mentality at a board as well. And I think a good product person would add a lot to board as well. We certainly had that at which I in so many respects I was very, very fortunate in that we had another partner from Silicon Valley Products Group in John Moore as one of the non-exec directors. He joined I think the same week that I did, and I couldn't have had a better blessing, right? As a inbound CPO, having that voice in the board down into the exec, down into the CEO, kind of preaching the same things as me, that made my life infinitely easier.
Helped to break down some barriers for sure.
Yeah.
So what one piece of advice would you give to aspiring leaders?
I think to aspiring leaders, get out and about, like visit other companies. If you've got friends or ex-colleagues or family members, just spend as much time as you can with other businesses. And I was fortunate early doors doing a little bit of consulting work. I got to play around in different industries and different companies, and it gives you a breadth of experiences. And you can go, well, I like that. I want to attach myself to more of that for a little while. So I think my one piece of advice would be get out and about.
Okay, let's just do some final thoughts, some quick fire questions.
Okay.
What's the hardest thing you've ever done?
Left a job I loved.
Oh, right. I'm going to just dive a bit deeper. Which job?
ITV. I loved my 5 years at ITV. And I had a piece of advice at the time to leave on a high from somebody that was outside the organisation. And I got this opportunity to jump over to BBC iPlayer. But it was, I remember I cried that day.
Oh my God.
I cried in the room with the director, and I was like, I really, really don't want to leave this company. But I'm glad that I did. I did leave on a high. It was wonderful. But that was a tough day.
Okay. Do you consider yourself lucky?
No, I think you make your own luck.
Okay. What are you the most proud of?
All the teams I've worked with.
That's nice.
People.
That's nice. What one book would you recommend to our audience?
There's a book by Cal Newport that's quite popular called So Good They Can't Ignore You. And I was given that as a gift by a former person speaking on this, Dave Washer. He gifted that to me and I read that. And since then, many years ago now, I gift that to people every now and then as well.
Okay.
So Good They Can't Ignore You.
Just gifted that to me too.
There we go.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, it's going to be a long old slog. So just, keep your head down and keep going.
Love it. Love it. Rico, thank you so much.
Not at all.
Thank you. This has been an episode of Breaking Down Barriers. Thank you for staying with us. And thank you again, Rico.
Thanks, Mark.